Um, We have a quorum present. I'll call the meeting to order. Roll call of the board members. Commissioner Evans.
Present.
Commissioner Talcott.
Present.
Commissioner Swenson, I believe, will be here, but he is not here at the time for some reason. Commissioner Trapula. Here. Commissioner Kontravitz.
Here.
Robinson here. And Commissioner Moran is going to be here, but he'll be a few minutes late. So let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Commissioner Trapula, if you lead us, please.
Over your hats, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner. Without objection, the current agenda is here. The consent agenda is made up of routine day-to-day items that require board action but do not appear to have significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion or vote by any board member. And in the consent agenda is approval of the minutes from May 29th, payroll checks totaling $54,128.16, maintenance and operation checks numbering 11,628 through 11,701 and totaling $851,523.24. Approve passenger facility charge totaling $72,000 and finance reports for May. Is there any objection? Let's just ask, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move approval of the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Fine.
Guess that's all of us against, just so we have it in the record. Okay, director's report.
Yes, well, good afternoon, everyone. The first thing I draw your attention to is we've got our terminal update for the month in front of you, the spreadsheet here. And we've made a number of revisions in the month of June. You may recall last month we had mentioned that we had to buy chemical to recharge our heating and cooling system now that we have the building expansion. We had thought that was going to be about $10,000, turned out to be only about $3,000, so we revised that one down to $3,000, which increases our contingency by about $6,000. Other items that we have for the month of June, we had some additional electrical work due to some of the manufacturer specs on the mechanical equipment in the building. That cost us just under $1,000. We have kind of a collective change order that we don't have pricing on yet. Exactly, we don't have the change order in hand, but it's to clean up a lot of the last items that in the layout of the building. As we got into the janitor's closet and saw the way the door system was going to work, the janitor would have had to walk past the women's restroom, and the view shed was more than we wanted with that situation, because you could see directly to the stalls from that doorway. So what we did is we changed the door to the opposite end of the hallway in that area. We also moved the work sink. Our fear was that the janitor might well say, look out, janitor coming, as he does when he cleans the bathroom, but they spend about 20 minutes back in that work sink area, and in that time somebody could feasibly come in and use the facilities, and then the janitor would kind of be stuck in there. So we've moved the work sink to where the ice machine was. We've moved the ice machine to a different location downstairs from the restaurant in order to accommodate a little bit better flow. And then what we plan to do in that area eventually is the lost area that's behind that women's bathroom. We want to, when we remodel those bathrooms some 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now, reclaim that 4 feet of space or so back into the women's bathroom to give them a little more area. We had a number of folks go through and take a look at the women's bathroom. They said they thought it was a little undersized, and so eventually when it's time to renovate those bathrooms, we'll pull that wall out and reclaim it. There's no work that was done on that wall as part of this project. It's the pre-existing wall. It's just now the entrance area where there used to be a mirror and a seating area. That area is gone because the entrance is on the other side. We were going to use that for a janitor's area, but now we've decided we don't want to do that. In addition to that, we ended up with a couple code issues. as the building inspector came through, the water fountain that was planned had to be revised to accommodate an ADA water fountain within the same unit. So we had to buy a slightly different water fountain. There was also some changes to the planters. We have some real live planters in that fireplace area that are meant to accommodate plants, and the building department wanted some changes in there to the P-trap system. And in addition to that, they had some air venting changes that they asked for also. So the total of that change order, which we expect in July, it'll probably come in 1 or 2 different change orders, going to be about $20,000. So we know it's out there somewhere. It has not been negotiated, but we have put it in the budget here just reflecting a placeholder. We also bought some temporary signage. We were getting a lot of confusion once Frontier started service because that gate that they're on has no number. We tried temporarily to call it 3A, 1A, because gate 1 was next to it. However, the little FID system we have doesn't accommodate letters, so there was no way to show that on the screen, and everybody was walking down to the Alaska gate and waiting for Frontier there, which obviously was not the right place. So we went ahead and bought some temporary signs and made the change to the gate numbers temporarily until the final signs are in place. So now our gates are numbered 1 through 5, starting at the left and reading down to the right. We don't skip concourses like we used to with the odds and evens. And so that cost us about $900. And then in addition to that, the airlines convinced us that we needed to change the way we had the paging system set up a little bit. What we had planned to do, what we want to happen is when they're boarding a flight, we want the boarding announcements to go through the entire terminal so that people that might be in the restaurant or even in the restroom or for some reason still out in this area know that flight number such and such on United is boarding now to Denver, and they know the seat numbers and everything. They get that information. We wanted that to go through the whole building, so that's how we set up the PA system. What the airlines told us too is they need a local paging capacity too at the gate so that they can tell people that have oversized items to come up and get, you know, the pink tag and that type of thing. So what we've done is we bought a microphone system, and we're going to add a relay in there so that they can actually override the speaker system and just capture the local speakers in their gate for local area announcements in addition to the gate boarding announcements. And that's about $6,700. So as we sit today, we spent we think we've spent about $235,000 of the $440 planned on the soft cost side. We still have a number of items that we plan to eventually spend out of that budget. I know the board expressed interest in replacing the carbon on a couple of the jet bridges. So you know, as we get to the tail end of this project, that's something we'll look to do. In addition to that, we as we'll talk about in a later item here, we have the FIDS displays that we had planned on spending out of this budget, and that's about $40,000, about $45,000. So there still are a number of fairly good size items. We have some more furniture we've yet to buy for the Terminal 2. So we have a few other things that will come out of here, but so far, as we get to the tail end of this project, I think we're doing pretty good on that soft cost budget. And that's, in addition to that, on the director's report, a couple other things I'd draw your attention to. The airport is helping organize a fundraising dodgeball tournament on July 13th. It'll be held in J.C. Park here in Great Falls. It's open to anyone that's interested in playing dodgeball. The National Dodgeball Association?
National Dodgeball League.
National Dodgeball League will actually be on hand to run the tournament for us. We're working with the T-Bid and the CDB to do a little bit of advertising, even in Havre and Lewistown, to try and draw some additional teams from out of town. We're also, I think, going to do some stuff in Butte, since they're not having a tournament down their way, and Helena. We'll do Helena too. And Kalispell's not having one either.
Billings isn't either.
We'll hope to draw in some teams from out of town and have a fun event. In addition to the actual tournament, there'll be some booths on hand where you can test your dodgeball skills. We're going to use our radar gun to time some dodgeballs, and for prizes, the top fastest dodgeball of the day will win something. We're going to have a skills throw the ball through the hole type thing, and then some other type of challenge. Each one of those booths will be staffed by one of the charities that's receiving proceeds. The charities that we've chosen for the event are the Rescue Mission, the Receiving Home, and the new Pet Humane Society building. And so those three will be on. Animal Foundation building. And so those three will be on hand to man the booths and help with volunteers for the event. We hope to raise quite a bit of money for the local charity and have fun. It's a promotion for Allegiant Airlines. They're doing these tournaments across the country, so they'll also be donating some items for the event. But that's July 13th at KC Park, and there's still plenty of room for additional teams. So feel free to start your team. You need 6 folks and at least 2 of the opposite sex. So you gotta have a mixed team, but it should be a lot of fun on the 13th of July. In addition to that, we did receive our Phase 3 noise grant. This is the grant that the board voted on last August. It was initially planned to be a $2 million program that included the what we call the NEM update, which is the noise exposure map update, and then design and construction of up to about 30 homes, about 25 homes. And we did not receive that grant in September as we thought we would. The FAA has been telling us all year we would eventually get that grant, and we finally have now been notified that that grant is available to us, although it does not include the construction element. It'll just be the NEM update and the design grant. The total is right around $750,000, or just about $800,000 for the NEM update and the design piece. I put it on the board voting agenda because I know it's been some time, so if we wanted to do a longer brief on that, I know we have some new commissioners. I'm happy to do that as part of the board meeting. We put the materials in there from last August, and then also a brief update of what's changed since last August. But we do have it on there as a briefing item if we want to.
When we voted to receive those, what were we expecting in funds?
We were initially expecting $2 million.
And we're getting about just under 800,000.
Just under 800,000. So what they've done is they've stripped the construction piece out of this year's grant, and then once we get the design done, they would eventually give us the construction next year. We had told them part of the problem we have today, as we've been reporting the last few months, is we're running out of grant proceeds from our last grant, and so we have the database that contains all of the warranty information for the homes that we've been inside. It has all the CAD drawings for the design of homes and everything else in it, which is just a ton of information, and it costs us about $3,000 a month to subscribe to that database service and the maintenance and everything else to maintain that system. So we were out of grant proceeds to help us pay for that. In the next month or two, we wouldn't have had any more money. And so we had asked them, is there any chance we can just get a design grant? Because the intent of a noise program typically is you would receive an annual grant for 5 or 10 years until you complete your program, and then that administrative burden cost, the person that answers the phone when someone calls to say, hey, I've got a warranty claim on the furnace that you guys messed with, or my window leaks that you put in, that person, all of those costs are normally carried from year to year, grant to grant. We were running out of grant, and so we were going to hit a point where we just had to quit answering the phone, and we had to put that database on some type of cold storage in order to stop the expenses. So we had asked them, is there any chance we can get a design grant so we can at least keep the process moving? And at the national conference I went to about a month and a half ago, I had talked to the assistant administrator of the FAA about this problem, and because they've been cutting noise grants back at many airports this year because the sequestration money is being used to help with the towers, so there's less money available for grants. And but what they had done in our case is they'd cut the entire grant, and we told them the problem with that is we don't have the local resources to pay the administrative burden going forward. So the good news is, now we have a grant pending that we can use to continue the normal, facilitation of that program.
Questions? Where and why did it cost $3,000 a year?
Is it a month?
A month?
About a month. And
Maintain?
well, so we've done 100 homes, and part of the reason is all of the information about the program is in this database. Everything from the CAD drawings of the improvements that were made, all the contract information, the warranty information for the individual, flues and stuff that were put in the home, the windows, the whole thing is in that database. And as well as all of the noise information, you know, the noise exposure maps and all that type of stuff. And like I said, the intent of the whole thing is the program just continues and you get it done. And so you subscribe to the database to give you a clearinghouse so you can access that information. It's never intended that you would stop. You know, so when the noise program executed the contract for the database, we paid in monthly installments for the upkeep and access to that database.
Well, I surely don't know enough about computers, but can't you just put that stuff on a bunch of those disks and throw them in a file cabinet?
And
And it
Kathy,
wouldn't cost us $36,000
well, we
a
did,
year?
and eventually it'll have to be kind of pulled off of there. But Kathy, do you have any idea how much storage space that is or anything like that? I mean, it's an immense amount of information.
Right. So I'm Kathy Harris, I'm with Stelling Engineers. I've been involved in the design team that was selected for the sound installation program since it was started in '09. We teamed with a database firm out of California who hosts and maintains the database. As John said, it contains all of our contract information for the 100 homes that have been treated. Okay? It also contains the noise testing results for those 100 homes. Additionally, it's been the tool that we've used to communicate with the public. Okay? So it's also been our PR records. When did we talk with these folks? What information about their navigation easement or their property ownership? So those pieces are also in there. Okay? The program itself is developed by a private firm. Okay? So they will provide the disk or the space, the hard copy, if you will, the CDs, if we want them. The issue is, once we transfer the information out of their database, okay, then to access it or continue to use it it's possible, but it's an extreme effort to access it. And again, a lot of this ties into the public relations with the other 300 homes or the 100 that have been treated.
So I liken it to kind of like a sales software if you were an engineering firm where you would keep all of your customer contact information, notes, you know, and that type of thing accessible within that client. And then in addition to that, you've got all the engineering specifications and the actual, you know, product warranty and all that data in that database. If you print all that stuff out, you're going to get a linear bunch of data that's going to be very difficult to cross-reference when someone calls us and says the window's, you know, leaking or something like that. You know, it's going to be very hard for us to determine, you know, who do we need to contact, you know, when was the project done, and, you know, and access those records. You know, so I mean that has been the problem we've had is there's not an easy way to reference that data other than to buy a system like this that can store that type of data.
Brad?
Couple questions. Now, my understanding is that we have run out of money to answer the phone in case someone does call with a maintenance issue. Is that correct?
Right, so as of the end of June, it looked as though we were going to be completely out of the ability to fund, you know, the neighborhood field office there. We had to, you know, the idea was we would shut down the sample room. We would not have anybody that would be assigned to the project that somebody could call and say, you know, I was told I was going to be insulated 2 years from now, you know, where are we, that type of thing. We were, you know, with the grant, now that we have a continuing grant, we can restart those functions because it's a normal part of the RSIP program. These programs, like I said, they're meant to get a commitment from the FAA for multiple years until you complete the program.
So phone calls are more PR than they are for maintenance calls.
I'd say the most common call is, I know I'm in an eligible area, when will my home be insulated? And usually they're calling because, let's say they have a window that the neighbor broke, and they're trying to determine, should I just buy a cheap window because in 2 years they're going to come fix my window? Or should I just plexiglass it over? Or, you know, should I go ahead and buy a new window? And, you know, I mean, that's the kind of calls you get quite often.
So how is it broken down between computer costs? There's a computer in through the... Or is it
No,
a
the-
person answer?
The system alone is $3,000, is that right, Kathy?
It's under 3,000. The 3,000 includes the fee for our firm to respond to the public comments as well, and then document it in the database.
So how does that actually break down between computer costs and
The
real person
The
costs?
minimal cost on the database support is $2,200 annually. So then there's an additional reserve to respond to public comments as needed, or if there's information that needs to be provided.
$2,200 monthly, right?
Right.
Yeah.
For the
And-
computer?
No.
Or for the
Excuse me,
software?
yes, for the database maintenance.
Yeah, okay.
That's the minimum. And the other comment I would add, John, we also keep our noise monitoring database information, so homes that have been tested for noise or whatnot, which would be used in the model update, the NEM model update that the Federal Highways, FAA has requested that we update due to the fleet change.
So, as they go through these homes, they test a certain number of them before and after the installation. I think is it a sample of about, what, 10%?
10 to 15%.
So we have actual noise results in these homes, and then that data will be used in the NEM update to model the current noise contour. Because the contour we're using now is 10 years old.
Other questions? Yes.
With the F-15s leaving, will the noise level drop?
One would assume the noise level will drop. And so, kind of getting back to what we had talked about last year, there's two factors that will reduce the scope of the noise program. The C-130 changeover will reduce the scope of the noise program some. In addition to that, the FAA has a new program guidance letter, as they call it, or PGL. It's actually not new, but they're now enforcing it in a different way. What they're saying is they want us to take all of the homes and classify them by traits, location, construction type, that type of thing, and then we have to sample within those groups a representative sample number of homes, and then the homes will be classified for eligibility based on the results of some noise monitoring. So, just hypothetically, if you had brick homes built in the 80s with tighter specifications in these neighborhoods, they might be quieter because of the construction needs. That whole category of home might end up being ineligible for noise insulation. Our NEM contractor that we're using for the exposure map update, they told us they anticipate that could reduce the number of homes in the program by 60%. So the contour is getting shorter. The requirements to be insulated are getting greater, and overall we think that's going to have an impact on the number of homes we have left. So we had thought we had, say, 300 homes left. That may well be down to into the hundreds, or it may well be much less than we thought we had 2 years ago. We'll know that once we get the NEM results, and then once we do the design for the phase 4 program. The first step will be to assess this program guidance letter and do the due diligence that's required under that.
Other questions? Anything else in the director's report?
Yeah, I've got a couple more. Frontier just completed their first month of service. They started May 17th. The average for the month, 77% load factor. That was about 3% below our target for May. We were hoping to get to 80. And they had about 100 less passengers than last year. They actually had less flights with a bigger plane. That may have something to do with it. We're also seeing a lot more head-to-head competition between Delta, United, and Frontier in Alaska. They all right now have similar schedules with that early morning departure, late afternoon arrival. So the pricing is very, very good in our market, but it looks like many of the frequent flyer crowd are choosing to fly their own carrier over, maybe transitioning to a Frontier, in our market in May. We also we're going to need a strong summer, I think, to increase the overall average. What we've seen on advanced bookings through June is okay. I mean, we look like we might end up at around 85% in June. July and August are very strong. We're just hopeful we can get the entire average up so we can show an 85% average by the end of the summer. September last year was a very challenging month, or we did very poorly, particularly the last half. We're going to put in a new advertising tranche that should start here in a couple weeks. We're going to focus on some advertising in Calgary, also the Lethbridge and Medicine Hat ads we've been running, another series here in Great Falls, and then we have a series that we're going to run some electronic advertising down in the Denver market and also Dallas for late season fishing and some early season hunting for those September flights, the first half of the month. So we're hoping to get the averages up and finish strong with that Frontier service for the summer. Overall, May passengers were down about 2%. That's about what we expected. We expected May to be relatively flat. June should be relatively flat, and then July and August we should have a pretty good increase in passenger volume, enough that we hope to enter September at about break even or even slightly ahead of last year's volumes. And the reason for that is the Allegiant schedule pulled about 5,000 seats out of the market in the first quarter. Those seats were transferred into the second quarter, so Allegiant's traffic is going to peak this year in the summertime. On those Vegas flights, they're flying, I think, 6 flights a week in July and August. There's plenty of air conditioning in Vegas. We'll just hope everybody goes down there and visits the casinos. You know, we expect by the end of the summer we'll be up again. But I looked through the state data a couple weeks ago, and I noticed that most of the Montana airports are down year to date. I know Allegiant pulled down some flights in a lot of those markets. I think that's got a lot to do with it. And it might just simply be a year where the vacation travel's a little bit later. So we'll see how June comes in, and hopefully we'll see the trend upward through the second quarter. So and then lastly, one thing I wanted to note is because of some of the refunding activity on the financing, and we'll get to this in one of the agenda items, but I think we would like to ask the board for a July meeting, probably the second week of July. We have an opportunity on the CFC bonds. The customer facility charge bonds, that's the rental car wash bonds, to refinance that, which we'll talk about in one of the agenda items. But you know, we would like to probably we would need a second meeting in July in order to make that happen. So just wanted to put that out there as a feeler, and we can talk about that some more as we get into the agenda. And that's all I've got on the director's report.
Good. Any questions of the director? All right, we'll move on to an annual presentation, SAIC presentation from Mr. Tim Runkle.
Hello everybody, my name is Tim Runkle. I'm with SAIC. We're an environmental consultant working with the Air National Guard Readiness Center in Andrews.
Would you tell us, everybody, what SAIC, I'm really bad with acronyms.
Right, it's an acronym for Science Applications International Corporation. They're a multinational company, and the portion that my group works with is actually pretty small. You may hear SAIC does a lot of IT, healthcare, that type of thing, but the environmental remediation is actually relatively small.
Thank you.
So we're a subcontractor of the Air National Guard, and we're helping them with their environmental remediation that is ongoing down at the airport property and primarily on the Air Guard base. I do have some handouts available for everybody. So everybody would have, if you in the crowd want some, I can pass them around. You can follow along here. I'd like to just give an annual update to the activities at the base, which include 2 different programs. One known as the Environmental Restoration Program, or ERP. That is the majority of the work that we're doing is underneath that. And then another smaller program that happened in this past year was known as the CRP Compliance Restoration Program. That was done to identify additional areas of potential environmental concern that may have arose since the last preliminary assessment was done at the base. Just a larger background here on slide 2 of the presentation. This program, in the ERP program, has been going on since about the 1980s. It identified about 8 different area of concerns. The area of concerns range from fire training areas to dry wells, which chemicals were disposed of during that time. I think there was a shooting range. But at this point, we're down to 5 of these areas. 2 known as Site 4 and Site 5 are former fire training areas. another two known as Sites 6 and 7, which also includes the GARD POL area. Those are related to dry wells, which were used for liquid disposals of petroleum waste. And similarly in Site 8, that's related to a dry well, which was used for liquid disposal of chlorinated solvent waste. As a result of those activities, there is some groundwater contamination. Predominantly at Site 6 and 7, it's a hydrocarbon groundwater contamination, along with some free-phase product. Over at Site 8, you're looking at a chlorinated hydrocarbon in the groundwater. And at Site 4, it's also a volatile petroleum-related hydrocarbon in the groundwater. And Site 5, through the recent investigations we've done, we've identified that there's no contamination to the groundwater there. We're actually dealing with an issue with barium in the soil. It's a relatively small area, about the size of the desk. And we're going to go ahead and do some modeling to close that site out. We do have our remedial objective goals, which includes cleaning up the groundwater, meeting our state standards and federal standards, removing all the product that's present at the site, and meeting compliance standards for soil. For those of you that have a booklet, you can see on page number 3, there's just a general layout of where these sites are located on the GARD property. In general, Site 4 and 5, the contamination there is confined locally to that area within a couple hundred feet. Site 6, 7, and 8 do extend out farther into like the ramp area of the base. Site 6 and 7 actually does come out farther across the taxiway and extends onto the airport property. The next few slides, which will be 4 and 5.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
If you'd rather do it or at the end. You were talking about you were going to remediate those. What's the time frame for that? The groundwater remediation?
Right. In general, the time frame varies per site. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Great,
Some we are expect to close out within our current contract and our current period of performance, which is about a year's time. Others will be longer.
Okay. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No problem.
Didn't know that was coming down the pike. So
Very good.
Just for clarification, you said a couple of sites where the pollution has gone out to the taxiways, but potentially into the airport property or something like that?
Right. Well, it is the airport property.
The GARD
Like I
is-
said,
the
all
GARD
of it's
is
airport
the
property.
property.
Yeah. When we're looking at it, we were looking at, okay, these are GARD operations. It's confined to GARD operations. Those outside of GARD operations across the taxiway, that's solely within the Great Falls operations. So, yeah, you're right. It is all on the airport property. Thanks for clarifying that. So, in general, I talked about the contamination that's present at each site, and we did some additional work this year and in the past year to give ourselves a boost to accelerate the dechlorination of chlorinated compounds at the site, to accelerate the breakdown of hydrocarbon compounds, and to accelerate the removal of product at the site. So this actually involved a lot of intrusive work. We did the installation of up to 28 wells across the base, and a lot of these wells were shallow injection wells. So I have a well at about 30 feet, and we have wells at about 65 feet, and these were used to inject either a nutrient solution, which is, in this case we used Epsom salts as our base, or in other areas of the base we used, it's called an emulsified vegetable oil, and we injected that solution as well. And the reason why it varied is because we were dealing with different compounds in those areas. Like I said, 6, 7, and 4, they're all hydrocarbon related to petroleum, but Site 8 is a chlorinated solvent. So there's different, same idea but different remedial approach. In general, the injection wells were put right in the source areas. So in the dry well areas, we surrounded that dry well where we knew it had been. They had all been previously removed, but we know they're there. So we tried to inject the solution into that source area so it would follow the pathway that the contaminant took down to the groundwater. So in previous years, the operations that we have gone on is really about extracting product, removing groundwater, adding an amendment to that groundwater and recirculating it. Now we're addressing pathways that the former contamination likely took to get to the groundwater.
So have you discontinued that flushing operation? Is that, you're not using that technology at all anymore?
We are still operating the large-scale groundwater system. Previously, that had been operating with an oxygen amendment.
Right.
And as part of this work, we added it in for a nitrate amendment to add additional nutrient to the organisms that live there that break down the hydrocarbons. So it's still operating in the same manner as it has. Now it's just a different nutrient that's being added to the subsurface.
Okay.
Have you identified the sources?
The sources? Yes, well, we know that, as I spoke of, it's the dry wells were the greatest contributor to the groundwater contamination at the sites 6, 7, and 8.
Are they still in use? Or
No. They were all removed. I think after 2000, sometime that time frame, there was some work done where they identified these features and removed them out.
Most of those were taken out during the time we built a new fire station. That's when we found a few of them.
And that was a fairly common practice, and from what I understand, the waste oil was just sent down a dried well, and
Sir, if I may, I'm Chief Matt Mitchell with the Air Guard over here. I'm the facility manager, real similar to what Rod does here at the airport. Up until 1986, the United States military, the whole Department of Defense, did not have to meet any of the requirements of the EPA. And President Reagan, in his infinite wisdom, says enough of this and signed into law that we would comply. But it didn't happen up to the 80s, but to about the mid-70s, I mean, it was a common practice to open up a hole in the ground and pour whatever you had into it. And that was whether it was a solid, a liquid, and they just didn't care. They never thought they'd have to remediate it. So we have a small portion of that here on the facility.
Very good.
Thanks.
So the work that we've done this past year, we were more focusing on these source areas that were documented, that we knew about, that had been contributors. The work that we were doing earlier was addressing that, but we started to see that we really had a lack of influence in certain areas, and it's probably due to the rock that we're sitting on top here. It's this jointed and somewhat broken up rock, and we wanted to try to add our treatment to those joints, to that broken up rock, so it would follow the pathway and hopefully flush it right down to where we needed to remove it. So I have a few of these pages that describe the number of wells, where we installed them, in what area, but in general they were pretty much all very similar type of treatment. This involved, you'll see on page number 7, it involved work that we did at night. We tried to accommodate the airport schedule. I didn't want to impact operations at all, but we're operating with large equipment out there, drill rigs, that type of thing. So typical image of a drill rig. That one was actually used there that night. That was the well that was installed out by the ramp area, closest to the taxiway. There's an image here of a typical injection setup that we did that was a temporary injection. It's just a matter of taking a poly tank, mixing your nutrient amendments, and then applying to those injection wells. All this was done in a period of about 2 months. Some of the smaller injections that were done around the dry well only involved the application of about 3,000 to 7,000 gallons worth of amendment water. Other injections, predominantly in the Site 8 area, involved a larger quantity of water because we were treating a groundwater source there too. I think that was up towards 100,000 gallons of water. And then after this was completed, which I think we wrapped up in September, October timeframe, we moved into a monitoring period where we wanted to monitor the effects of what we just did. Is it doing what we thought it would do, and do we need to do some more work to get it to that point? So I have a few slides here starting at 9, which talk about the most recent data that we had collected, which was March of this year. We did a round of groundwater sampling to test the water. So just briefly, over at Site 4, we actually have a lack of data there because the The source, the area where we found the contamination was relatively shallow, less than 30 feet. And it's been dry over the winter, or at least so as evident in the groundwater, because those shallow wells didn't have any water, so I have a lack of data there. So moving forward, we're going to continue to monitor that and see how the approach is done. I know we're here this week and there's water in that well, so we'll have some good results this year. Just to mention Site 5 again, there was no issue with groundwater, and we're addressing the soils issue there. The soils issue will be addressed through modeling, because that's a barium concentration that demonstrates that's over an impacted groundwater standard. It's about 8 feet down. Your groundwater we're looking at here is about 40 to 50 feet down. We have significant evidence there to try to model that away and get acceptance from the state just to close that site altogether. The other 3 sites, which are often more of a concern, which is on page 10 and has been most of the has had most of the attention to date, are 6, 7, and 8. What we see there is that we know we have the groundwater plume and the product plume at 6 and 7 is confined. We know it's not migrating anywhere. We know where it is. We do have some data that suggests it's starting to shrink. But where we stand out, there's 30 groundwater wells there, and right now 21 of them meet the standards, state standards and federal standards. So we have about 9 wells to continue to monitor and make sure we get them to that point where we can meet those state standards. Similarly, in Site 8, along with the new well that we installed out there to delineate, we now know that our plume is defined, it's not going anywhere. There is some evidence that it's starting to slow down and shrink. But we have 4 compliant wells out of the 12 there. So there is some more monitoring of the effectiveness of what we did in the past year to see where that's going to end up. So generally these are concentrations in the groundwater. They're 1 or 2 orders of magnitude greater than what we're attempting to remediate to. So there's still some legwork to do there. The next few slides, you may have seen these before in our annual meeting. They give just kind of a range for you to demonstrate that the plume that we know of in our baseline sampling that was done between 2004 and 2008 is today is less than it was at that time. So I give you an example for benzene, where a historic plume is of a certain shape and size, and now we've managed to reduce that to a smaller shape and size. And similar with some other compounds that we analyze for. C5 and C8 hydrocarbons, C9 and C10 hydrocarbons. It's very linear, it's very an elongate feature in groundwater contamination, but you can see compared to where we had been in 2008 and 2004, it's shrinking in width and also in length. And I give you an example for the Site 8 groundwater as well in this booklet. Just kind of wrap up what we're moving forward at these sites. We're continuing to monitor the groundwater, to monitor the concentrations and see how they're trending downwards, to monitor the effectiveness of the treatments that we did in the past year. I see I neglected to mention some other work that we did related to the product at Site 6 and 7. We did what they call some surfactant flushing, and this is basically an injection of soap to liberate that so we can increase recovery. And here under future reactions or future actions, we're going to do another event of that if it's needed. So if we got good recovery but it's still there, we're going to hit it again and try to get more of that feed-based product out. We continue operating in the groundwater system. We continue operating in the existing systems that had been there, which were source treatment systems, and that was a bioventing and a vapor extraction system. So everything existing continues. On the slide 15, and I'll talk about time frames here. Site 4, the goal on a time frame there is to close it out within my current period of performance, which is within a year's time here. I need to get about, I think we get 4 samples, 8 groundwater samples that are compliant with the state standards, then there's no further need to keep that one open and we can close that one area out. Site 5 closes out within a year with acceptance from the Department of Environmental Quality on our modeling results for soil because there's no groundwater issue there. Sites 6, 7, and 8 are the ones that will continue. They're going to need to go through a quarterly monitoring period to evaluate the effectiveness of our treatment. And then once we know what the effect was and what the potential for a downward trend is going to be, it will probably end up in a long-term monitoring period. And that's done to ensure that no other further treatment is going to be needed and that it is trending down to a standard that's acceptable to the state. That time frame can be several years, but it's not something that we'll know until we get some more data in so we can evaluate what the downward trend is going to be. Slide 17, I'll offer you all a few contact information within SAIC and the Guard. So if you have any questions or if you need a copy of this presentation, I'm more than happy to send that along. And I do need about 2 more minutes just to explain the other part, the CRP contract that I talked about. But before I do that, if anyone has any questions about this portion, I think that's probably good to answer them now.
Could you just describe briefly what modeling means for the barium?
Sure. So barium, there's several standards for barium in soil. One would be a direct contact where it's not safe to touch it, either for residential or non-residential purposes. The one that we're dealing with deals with an impact to groundwater. So it will conceive what happens when water washes through that and gets down into your groundwater. So is that soil source going to contaminate the groundwater? Now what the modeling does, it takes site-specific information, so soil type, precipitation, weather events, that type of thing. And it will model what a more realistic concentration will be based on where your soil is, the depth on it, the type of soil. So the state publishes standard soil standards for an impacted groundwater. But it's permissible and it's allowed to model it basically to demonstrate that your concentration, your soil type and location will not contribute. So that's what our attempt here is, because in general the model that they use to develop their standards is not applicable to all scenarios. For instance, your groundwater may be in contact with that soil. It may be much closer. I mean, here we have an extensive distance to travel before that water that would go through that soil would get down. And barium in large is an immobile compound, so it's not typical that it would move farther in the soil than a couple feet. Definitely not 40. So we'd like to approach it that way. That way we can avoid additional soil sampling, additional intrusive work.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Kunkel, can you give us an idea over the life of this contract, what it's going to cost?
The cost, okay. So the remedial effort that we put forth over this past year, which involved monitoring well installation, they did a hydrofracking of those wells to get, or injection wells to extend it. This is typical for a significant effort. I think that we had put somewhere in the time frame of $2,000 to $3,000 worth of effort into that work. And that included all our monitoring effort over a 2-year period of time. Now, if you were just going to we're going to go out there and we're going to collect groundwater samples and move into long-term monitoring without any active treatment, that's relatively cheap in perspective, where you're only looking at $20,000 to $30,000 a year effort for somebody to come and do quarterly groundwater sampling. Now, to project it out a number of years, you would just take that number and multiply it out. Unfortunately, I can't give you a number for total to closure because we just don't have the data to support what our trend would be to get us there. But that's ballpark and typical prices for this type of work.
But to set up the initial system, that water recovery system and everything like that, I mean, surely it must have been a couple $100,000 effort to set up that injection system and everything, I would think. Is that what you're asking, the whole cost of the whole program? I mean, I couldn't speculate on it, but certainly that equipment you have out there, the recirculation system has pumps and water tanks that, circulate back and then recollect it. I mean, I'm sure that was probably a fairly expensive system.
Yeah, I'd expect it to be similar to what we did in the past year, because that involved the installation of, well, I think we did 20-some monitoring or remedial wells there. We also did the hydrofracking. We did trenching. The construction of those buildings was a significant effort. And that was done under a different contract and at a different time. So the renewal of our contract this past year was done to evaluate the current performance of it and see how we could get it to go faster.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Rumco.
Well, real quick, just 1 minute. On the end of this, you'll see this CRP program. This was done to identify additional areas of concern that may exist there. They did a preliminary assessment about 2 years ago, and 2 sites were selected for further investigation. And during this past year, we did some soil boring to investigate those areas. And I should mention that those samples came up fine. There was nothing there above a screening level or state criteria. And those sites are recommended for closure on the base. So there should be no further investigation of those 2 areas, no new releases at the base. So we're just currently moving forward with addressing what we had historically. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay, next is the FIDS RFP.
Yes, as we mentioned in the last couple of board meetings, we're at the point where we want to replace our flight information displays in the terminal. That's the screens that display the flight information on arrivals and departures, a couple locations. Currently, we have 2 locations upstairs, and then down at the counter, every airline has their own location. The data we have today is not updated data. It's keyed in based on the schedule, and then the airlines update that information locally when there's a flight delay on either end of the flight. What we want to transition to is an automated system that updates based on databases that are provided by both, there's a private vendor called FlightView, and then there's actually an airline database that each airline has. So we put out an RFP a couple months ago. We got 5 responses in. We provided this little spreadsheet here comparing the different offers that we received, the different proposals that we received and their pricing. And then we provided today an updated memo here recommending that we select FIDS.com. Over the last week, we have had time to contact several references of FIDS.com that are our size, Duluth. I also talked to, I have called in Eagle, they have not called me back, but I did talk to Duluth and one other airport in the Midwest relative to the FIDS, FIDS.com proposal. They're very pleased with it. They are the low-cost provider. We estimate a full rollout with a 5-year contract for the data is going to cost us about $45,000. Today we're paying $3,500 per year for the system we have. Like I said, the new system, we've asked for a number of features. We'll have the updatable data, and what that'll do, we talked to them today about how their data feed works. In the case of Delta, they'll actually go out and query the Delta flight system, and it'll update automatically whatever's in the Delta system, so that all of our Delta flight information will be coming right from the airline and their flight desk, so that it should be up to date. In addition to that, they eventually plan to have United data in the next year. They also have Alaska data. The only airline you can't get that data for that we currently have is Allegiant. They simply don't have an automated way to hook into their system. So that data will be automatically updated off of FlightView, which talks to the transponder in the plane. So the only time you end up with a problem there is if the plane has not left the gate, and the system will go out and get the schedule data, but if the plane hasn't left the gate by the time it arrives here, it will continue to show that flight on time. The minute it pushes back from the gate, the transponder will engage, FlightView will get the data, and it will say, oh, you were supposed to leave at 1 o'clock, you've now left at 2 o'clock, you're an hour delayed. But in the event that a plane doesn't push back by the time it's supposed to arrive here, our local system won't pick that up. So to supplement the system, we asked for 2 other pieces of software that we'd like to put in on our system. The second is a flight map and tracking. And what that'll be is we can actually draw a geographical area of the country. Hopefully it would be big enough to pick up all of our hubs from Seattle and Minneapolis down to even Phoenix. And we would show that map on our screen, and then it would show the location of any flight that's inbound right off the transponder and outbound. So we can actually, what we plan to do is have the flight display go 20 seconds of probably arrivals and departures, and that'll probably be split 10 and 10, and then it'll switch over to probably 15 seconds of the flight map to show where the actual planes are along with the flight number, and then it'll switch back into arrivals and departures, and it'll just repeat like that. And what that allows it to do is then people can look at that and say, oh, it says here the flight's on time, but I see now it hasn't left Denver. I know that it's not on time. And that's kind of the belt and suspenders way to let people know exactly where their plane is. And then what we'll do is we'll display that information in the bar and restaurant and that type of thing. So if you're in there and you want to know, do I have time to get something to eat, you can actually look up there, see where your plane is, and you'll know roughly how much time you've got in order to get something to eat. The third piece of it, we wanted to actually broadcast this live information out onto our website. So we asked each vendor for pricing to set up an interface with our URL, and so what that's the web services piece. And like I said, overall, iFids was the cheapest at $45,000. That does include the 5-year subscription. Our plan, all along was to prepay this as part of the construction contract, or as part of our construction allowance, so we get those flight displays all ship-shape by the time when the project opens. All of the PCs and TVs the hardware component of this will be installed as part of the construction project. Most of the monitors are actually already in place. And then at each location where the airlines can enter information into the system, there's a small PC attached to the TV that allows them to do that. So for $45,000, we'll get this piece of it pulled together. If we can get approval, we're asking for approval to select iFids for our FIDS vendor. A contract value of about $45,000.
I think the baton was passed back to me. Have we had a motion on this yet?
We have not.
All right. So the director is asking for a motion for approval for purchase of this equipment for $45,000. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the bid from iFids, $45,000 for 5 years worth of service.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there discussion?
I just have a question. You expect to see some, there's variance between the different companies, but can you account for what the ComNet software, I mean, obviously it must be the Cadillac of the programs, but it's such a...
And for the bigger airports, I think part of it, each one of them has more customization and capability than the other, and there's a lot of nice features. If you go to some of the airports, they have a highly customized display, that's specific to their airport with their graphics and that type of thing on it. And I think some of these providers, they charge quite a bit for that. It's interesting looking at the client list of iFids. I saw a lot of airports like St. Cloud, Duluth, some of the other guys. A few of the other ones, I think Missoula has air. Lost my sheet here. I think they have the Air Transport Services (AIT), and I want to say a couple of the airports in the state have Pro Digix, there. And so I think. If you look at iFids, they're a newer provider. They're a Canadian-based company out of Ontario, and so I don't know how long they've been in the market. I had not heard of ComNet before, and their pricing did seem a little steep, but I can't account for why it's that steep. We actually, that was one of our questions. We poured through it. We were trying to figure out, what was special about that. The other thing is, too, some of the newer systems are web-based, and so they really don't have any proprietary. We've yet to find anything from iFids that we have to buy in terms of their equipment. We kind of probed them on that today to figure out how we interact with our PCs on the TV. I think some of these other providers do have, they have a more hardware intrusive system, and so it's going to have their hardware at your site to receive their signal and that type of thing. So yeah, I think it's just a difference in their way they provide their solution. iFids is cheaper. They're not out of the ballpark with several of the other ones, but then that one out there is pretty expensive relative to the others. And we did ask everybody for the option to prepay, because like I said, we wanted to pay for this out of the soft cost budget.
Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other comments, questions? All right. Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? Aye. Opposed if there be any by the same sign? Motion passes. I'd like to thank Commissioner Robinson for starting the meeting today. My apologies for being late. I guess Shell thought they needed me more the first part of the meeting than Great Falls International Airport Authority. So anyway, glad I could be here. We'll move to item number 3. This is a request to approve, have the board approve the 2013-2014 budget, which was discussed both in the Finance Committee and brought to the work session with no objections moving it to this meeting for approval. Director or Maria, would you like to comment on the budget?
I'll give you, there's a couple quick updates since we had the budget committee back in May. The two main impacts of the budget have been, first of all, we've realized some savings in the current fiscal year, 13, of about $50,000. Our gas bill was a lot lower. We had really anticipated a big increase in our gas bill with us having the back of the building open all winter, but the air handling system, they were able to get really good negative pressure in there, and the temperatures weren't that bad, and so we saved quite a bit on that gas bill. In addition to that, we had less overtime than we had planned for during the year too because of the mild winter. So overall, we have about $54,000 in savings. As you've heard me say before, when we sit down with the airlines to go through the budget, it gets scrutinized pretty heavily, and so when we get to the end of the year, I always like to spend the expense budget, up to what we said we would spend, because it doesn't do us any good to refund that money back to the airlines. The main scrutiny is done on the expense budget. So what we like to do is try to get ahead of the next year's budget as best we can. So with that $54,000 in savings that we currently anticipate, I've asked Rod to go ahead and buy our summer's paint for the runway. This year we'll have a pretty aggressive painting program as just part of our annual maintenance. So we're going to issue a contract for about $40,000 in paint in order to get ahead of our paint buying for the summer paint that will happen this year. What that's enabled us to do is we've cut next year's budget on the paint item by $40,000 in materials since the last budget meeting. And we've taken that $40,000 and we've asked for a small capital purchase of a new paint machine. So we're actually going to move that out of the expense operating budget over into the capital budget and purchase a paint machine. The current machine we have was literally fabricated on site. It's very labor intensive. It doesn't have a lot of adjustability, and it's unable to handle the glass beads that we now have to put in the paint on the runway markings. The new machine we're looking at in here, and you'll see it later in the agenda as a capital purchase, has the ability to include those glass beads as part of the spray. And so it's going to enable our guys to do a lot better job, a lot faster, and do much more of our own painting going forward. Things that we would normally have to contract out, we'll be able to do. So that's one change. We're going to reduce the operating budget for next year in that paint item by about $40,500. Transfer that over to the capital side. The second change from the packet you received, when we made that adjustment to the budget, unfortunately we picked up an old version of the budget, and we missed a change that we had reported back in June. Thankfully, Commissioner Evans caught it this morning. We had gotten a favorable cost back from the city on our health care insurance. They were able to hold the budget on their new provider from what we had last year. We had anticipated an increase of about $20,000 on our health insurance, which will not occur. We had put that in a revised copy of the budget that we were working with mid-June, but in the copy you received, we missed that change. So the revised copy that you've got in front of you now has that adjustment to the budget. We've reduced the on, if you look at page 3 here, I think it is, or actually
Page 4.
page 4, you can see the health insurance line item there on line 70 is the same as last year, which is our current estimate of what our health insurance will be. And we just received that information mid-June, so we unfortunately missed it in this copy of the budget. But those are the two main changes from the budget you received back at the in the last meeting, and then that we talked about at the audit committee on May 14th.
And then all the other numbers, I mean, taking into account those changes, they tie back to what went through the finance committee and the work session.
That's right. Those are the only expense budget changes we've made. It's just the two items, and the change to the paint budget is revenue neutral because the airlines they end up paying the capital item just like they would the expense item. So there's no change in the budget there. The change to the health insurance does lower our landing fee by about 2 cents. So instead of being 122. Which is what we told the audit committee back in May, it'll actually be 120. So our landing fee revenue does come down a little bit from that.
Okay, all right.
Sounds like Commissioner Evans might be a good candidate for the budget committee.
She gets the gold star. That was the
She
main
does get
catch.
the gold star, and she sent me this email, and she said, "Did you know?" And it's a very good job. Chair would entertain a motion for approval of the budget.
I'll make the motion.
Is there a
To
second?
approve the budget as presented today.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right. A motion has been made for approval and seconded. Is there any discussion or comment on the budget or questions? The one thing I would mention is that we did spend some time in the finance committee. I think you were in that meeting as well, and Commissioner Swenson, who was excused for today, but I think it shows that we're on solid footing, and I think we've got a lot. We've accomplished a lot with the previous budgets, and I think this will continue to put us in the position that we want to be in going forward. So I think it's pretty good. Any other questions or comments? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, if there would be any? All right, motion passes, budget passes. All right, revenue note resolution for refinance, and I know we have bond counsel present. Director, do you want to?
Sure, maybe I'll start out by just going over the summary. Maria prepared this little summary, which we put here in your packet with the 2013 refinancing resolution summary. The documents will have a pretty dramatic effect on our financial position going forward. We'll finally be in kind of a consolidated state with our new documents, so that we'll have all the financings kind of under one umbrella. That simplifies the legal documentation for the airport. We kind of get to an industry standard resolution, which is much more like most of our peers with respect to our covenants and our debt service calculations. We'll get all of our debt on monthly payments, which over time will save us some money. We'll release the mortgage on the FedEx building, as well as Fargo is not requiring a mortgage, but U.S. Bank does have a mortgage on that building today. We've completed the mayor's certificate already, and the Board of Commissioners meeting will be held, I believe it's still next week, is it not, Commissioner?
We had today.
You had it today, okay. I was thinking it was next week. Did we pass?
Yes, you did.
Excellent.
That's good to know.
So we now have the county's approval. The airport's funds, covenants, and defaults and remedies and everything. Like I said, we'll be standardizing all that. We'll be defeasing our escrow accounts and dealing with some tax issues with this document also. And Ben, is there anything you'd like to add just in terms of the documents? And Ben Johnson is our bond counsel, as he has been for the last 3 or 4 financings, I believe.
Yeah. Commissioners, it's nice to be in front of you again for the camera and stuff. Ben Johnson, Kennedy and Graven. I think from my perspective, a resolution like this is a good event because we're talking about saving the airport money over the long term and taking away interest rate risk and things like that that are in play. And I think the airport also set itself up to take advantage of this in 2011 with some planning and making that U.S. Bank note prepayable at that time. So that's about all I have to say. The one thing I would say is the interest rate market, as you've seen in the papers, is going up pretty dramatically. The bank, you've chosen to work with Wells Fargo, their cost of funds have not gone up quite as much as the Treasury bill, but I think there's a little bit of a impetus to try and get things buttoned up, and the Wells Fargo banker who's responsible for doing all the due diligence, I think is going to be up here next week to meet with John as the last part of that, and I think we can lock the interest rate almost next week or sometime right after the 4th, which is, I think, advantageous with the market bouncing around all crazy here. So although the cost of funds isn't where it was 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago, it's still very attractive on a historical basis.
Can we, for some a point of reference to the board, do we know how much that's moved relative to when we first made the decision to go with Wells?
I think the last numbers I saw, they were at 222, isn't that right?
It's
2.2.
actually about between 219 and 222 and now to 2.54.
So we
About 30
were,
basis points?
Yeah, about 30
Yeah.
basis points.
And-
We were at 1.89, I think, and then at the other piece of it was at 2.12, originally 219. So yeah, it's about 30 basis points.
It's still pretty incredible
Oh, yeah.
money. Yeah, and you know, U.S. Bank was going to float too. So
Yeah.
the one nice thing, and I think John will push the banker on this when he's up here next week, is Wells will lock if they know that we're within a couple of weeks of a funding date that everybody agrees with, and I think it's gone fairly smoothly to date on the documentation and changes and comments to the documents. So that's a good thing. There haven't been really onerous requirements of them, so it's been pretty straightforward.
And one of the things that, you know, I was looking for with these, and we have it in here now, is, you know, we can issue some debt underneath these bonds. Before we were locked down pretty tight, and, you know, and now we have the ability to do some financing. It's one of the things we're yet to work with the banker on. I'd like to see us be able to issue $100,000 without bank approval. And the reason for that is if we would ever decide to buy a piece of equipment on a capital lease or something like that, you know, some of the things we might buy are, you know, in that $100,000 range. It would be nice to, you know, to have that. They're currently proposing $25,000, so it's one thing we want to work on. Even a copier anymore on a capital lease is almost that. So, you know, we'd like to be able to get that limit up. But I think other than that, you know, now we have a reasonable debt service coverage ratio. You know, some of the other terms in here I think are going to be a lot easier for us to work with over the years. You know, as we continue to issue debt.
Commissioners, one thing I would say too is there is one of the notes from 2003 is not prepayable until December of this year, and so this would deal with refinancing the 2003A bond, the 2011 bond, the new bond for the snow removal building for the authorities portion of that project, and then, as John mentioned, possibly the refinancing the car wash rental note from 2009. That's all wrapped in one resolution. We would be coming back with what we call a supplemental resolution, which is how you would issue new bonds or notes in the future, where you supplement this original resolution with the terms of the new note or bond. So this acts as kind of a master document for things going forward.
And the one thing I would note, we sent everybody the resolution documents because we have made an allowance in the resolution for the refinancing of the rental car facility notes. With the selection of Wells Fargo, Wells was the financing agent on that debt issuance when the project was built. It does not have a call window for another year. However, Ben suggested that we ask Wells if they could find a way to work with the investors in that note to get us a better rate. And Wells has come back with a proposal to drop the interest rate by 2%. And we just received that last week, I think it was, the information from them. We're still working on the terms of that, but right now that note's financed at about 656. Wells Fargo is willing to drop that note down in the 4.5 range if we want to refinance it now. The main benefits to us, every time we go through a refinancing, we end up spending about $40,000 in attorney fees between our attorney and their attorney. That's a fairly small note. It's only $1 million, I think, left, about 1.1 million remaining on the note. If we wait the next year, we run the rate risk of finding a rate that's above that 4.5 level. I think I would say it's a 50-50 shot. So the main thing we're getting out of it is we're saving that about $40,000 in attorney's fees that we would spend next year to refinance the note. So you'll see on the working session, we've got on there an item for the refinancing of that rental car note. We didn't anticipate that would be an opportunity for us. When we put this financing together, it has evolved out of the selection of Wells Fargo. And so that's one of the reasons we may ask the board for a July meeting. We would need to come back to approve that refinancing. It is not a tax exempt note, so we don't have to go through the public hearing process with the county and the city as we did on the rest of our debt. We can do that with just local approval. But we wouldn't necessitate a second meeting for approval in July.
And it's not integral to this particular structure, but it is because we are doing this deal that essentially gave us
exactly
a little leverage to leverage it down.
Right. As we began negotiating that Wells proposal, one of the things we threw out to them was, hey, we have this other piece of debt, which is really our last piece of debt at a high rate. And we asked them, is there any potential to lower that rate? After a couple of weeks, they've come back to us and said, yes, they can.
Yeah, and I would say, Commissioners, that the final terms, in the resolution, you'll notice that I put in a provision, because you meet once a month, that the final dollar amounts and interest rates and things like that can be determined by the chair and the airport director signing the documents like we've done in the past. I did include the refinancing of the car wash facility as a note and a use purpose here. Obviously, if the chair and the airport director don't feel that that's advantageous, and now if you have a July meeting, the board doesn't feel advantageous, we just won't issue that note. But the resolution is set up to approve issuance of it. I didn't know if you were going to have a July meeting. And also, we're still trying to work out what the final refinancing with the car wash note would look like. Whether the authority contributes a little bit of money or if it's all in the refinancing. And then one of the side benefits is there will have to be a little bit of an escrow on that because of the call date out there. And Wells is working to identify possible investments to help mitigate some of that escrow cost. And we just don't have those details yet. So the other thing I would say is just a reminder for everyone, that note is a taxable note because it doesn't qualify under the tax exempt rules because it benefits the car rental companies. And car rental facilities under federal tax law can't be issued on a tax exempt basis. They're not an airport facility because they can be off-site.
Right. All right, so you're looking for an approval of the resolution. So the chair would entertain a motion for approval of the resolution as it has been described and outlined.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there discussion on the motion?
Do members of the board have any questions about?
Don't we want to modify the motion, or do we want to modify the motion so that the airport director and the chair have the ability to
To sign that document?
without us knowing the final dollar amount?
We haven't taken it through work session though, have we?
The CFC piece?
Right.
No, the work session piece is today.
That's what,
And then, that's why we would need that July meeting.
we have to still run it through
Yeah,
work session.
'cause like I said, when we started our refinancing, we didn't envision we would have, because the call date's another year from now, we would have any opportunity to refinance that piece.
And Commissioner Kantorowicz, just so you know, so the process, if the resolution's approved, the process would be, the Wells Fargo banker has to come up here and sit down with John. That would be next week, I think on the 2nd.
Yeah, I think that's
Right,
right.
he needs to
Right
look and
before.
see that there's an airport here. Obviously the branch head knows, but they have to do these questions. You'd be amazed at what people find out over time. And then I think they need to do some final internal things. Large banks, they have internal review of everything now, especially under Dodd-Frank. And so I think if you have a meeting on the 9th or whatever and pass whatever voice or, verbal thing you need to, or talk about this again, that'll be just fine, because we wouldn't be able to finalize the documentation until mid-July anyways. So there's no need.
Okay, very good. Any further discussion on the motion or questions for Ben? All right, all in favor of the motion? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much, Ben.
Yeah, thank you, and like I said, I'll have another resolution probably in August for that last refi, and this is a great thing because you're able to save a lot of money in the future for yourselves and your airlines.
Let's get it done before Bernanke speaks again.
Yeah, that guy costs money.
Just so you know, I think the bank mode in this situation has been very helpful with you, because and you would know, Commissioner Evans, a little more, I think, but the cost of funds to the banks hasn't risen as much. The municipal marketplace, publicly sold municipal bonds, went up 70 basis points in the last week. And so it's kind of been a rout. And so I think you're getting in just under the wire here before we have a little bit of a problem again with rates.
Yeah, I think we've done the right thing here in trying to get the deal closed early. We knew, going into the spring, we were ahead of the game. We wanted to get it done quick, and so I think the timing's working out well. And the other thing that this financing does for us too, really, is all of our debt will be prepayable without a penalty
After a couple of years, yeah.
Yeah, so we can really begin working away and defeasing that debt. We don't have any call windows we have to worry about or anything like that going forward.
Yeah, it'll provide another matter of
But it
flexibility.
may be a long time before we see rates this low.
Yeah, that's true.
I believe that, but I remember when we were here in
Oh, I know.
2011, and we thought, and it was a great interest rate U.S. Bank proposed at the time, a 4.19, and we didn't think we'd be there. And even when we were looking at this refinancing, it was like, well, do we even offer that up? We put it in, and you're going to save, 170, 175 basis points or something on that for the next 8 years. So thank you, everyone, and it's always great to be in Great Falls.
Thanks, Ben, appreciate it very much. Item number 5, acceptance of snow removal equipment grant.
We got a call last week and found out that our grants for the year are ready, and we've been awaiting this call for some time. The major construction project for 2013 construction season is our snow removal equipment building. We have approved the building, and now we're ready to accept the grant. If you flip over your grant application, on the back is a spreadsheet. The FAA has called and told us they're willing to issue a grant of up to $2.1 million. We don't have the actual grant offer yet, but it will include our full entitlements for 2013 in that center box there that's outlined. Our full entitlements are just under $1.8 million. We have our cargo carrier forward from last year. We didn't spend our cargo entitlement grant, which was just about $85,000. And then we have a third piece, which is an advance on our next year's entitlements. Butte has decided not to do any construction this summer, so they're turning their entitlement grant back in. And what that allows the local ADO to do is they can then advance those funds back to airports that do have a project. And so we're able to advance about $231,000 of up to $231,000 of next year's entitlements That's a good deal for us because all of our entitlements next year will be fully dedicated to the runway 1634 project, and we're going to need more money than our entitlements can provide. The rest of it will come from discretionary grants. By advancing next year's entitlements, we actually get a benefit out of that because we get overall net more money for the next year or 2 years of our program. So that brings our total expected grant offer to a maximum of $2.1 million. And we would like to ask the board's approval to accept the grant of $2.1 million for our 2013 construction program.
All right, very good. So at this time, the chair would accept a motion in this regard.
Hard time to do motions.
Boy, I tell you,
I'll second that motion.
I don't think you made it yet.
Oh, I'll make the motion.
You want to make the
Accept it
motion? All right, is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Is there discussion on the motion?
Does this mean my taxes
Free
are
money
gonna
is-
go up?
Yeah.
No,
No.
Free
Never.
money is better than cheaper money.
That's true. Any further discussion on the motion? I mean, I realize this is one we're gonna chew on for a while, but. All right, all in favor of the motion? Aye. Opposed, if there be any by the same sign, motion passes.
So basically, on number 6, the director discussed it, and then we had quite a lively discussion at it, so probably, I guess I would ask the commissioners if there's any more that they want to discuss on that same subject.
since it had been so long, I provided materials from the last, when it was presented to the board last year, and then also an update of what's different, and I didn't know if there was any other discussions.
So do any of you have any further comments or want to discuss this any further?
I just have a question, probably due to my newness, but when you were talking, John, about the new rating system or whatever that the homes might be classified under, that could be one of the reasons why this is a reduced program overall. Is there an appeal process if someone doesn't like their?
There's not. I think certainly, if they came to us and said, we think we've been miscategorized for some reason, we could take a look at that. And really, this whole process that's coming out of the program guidance letter has not been widely completed, in my knowledge, at any airport. The intent of it makes sense. If you have a certain type of construction in a neighborhood that's more immune to noise, why would you noise insulate that house to make it, even quieter? The thing is, I think what the FAA found in the implementation of these programs is that the noise, the monitoring cost is not inexpensive. So if you're going to classify these homes into a whole bunch of different categories and then go in and test each category of home and get a representative sample, you've spent a lot of the kitty determining who's eligible, and then you still have to do insulation on who's eligible. So I think in many cases what the airports have said is rather than get into all of that, we would rather get the easement from the homeowners, not waste the money on all that modeling, and do and insulate as many homes as possible. And so that's what was in practice for many years. But I think if somebody came in and they could somehow make a compelling case that we've categorized them the wrong way, I suppose the FAA would be open to that argument to look at the home and see if there's a different category they might fit into better. The answer is, this is one of those, we're not sure what's in the sausage yet type of regulations that as these programs encounter this implementation of the PGL, we'll see best practices emerging that we can use in terms of categorizing.
And then just to make sure I follow the terminology, so the design part really means going into the houses and figuring out what needs to be done?
Yeah.
Construction is what is fixing the problem.
Right. Yeah, this next phase 3 of the program should complete, or fairly close to complete, West Hill. And that is, obviously the most impacted neighborhood because they're the closest in elevation and location to the airport. So our goal is hopefully with this design package, we would be designing the improvements to complete that West Hill neighborhood.
Okay. Anything else on this item? So this was more for information.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Airport Authority Board comments, Commissioner Evans,
None.
Commissioner Talcott,
None.
Commissioner
Yeah,
Trujillo.
for Rod, what paint machine were you looking at, really?
Well, we took bids on a few different ones, but the one we're looking at, I'm not sure what you have then, but.
We've got it in the work session. There's a
Easy
little-
liner, yeah, we're gonna cover it in the work session.
Yeah, there's actually a little handout in that portion of the packet there. It's the,
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Petrowitz.
Well, I do have a comment, and I don't want this to be derogatory or insultory or anything of the sort, but I want to bring it up during the meeting because I think the entire board needs to be apprised of a situation that there is at the airport here. And that's airport policy about light aircraft not being able to make a U-turn and back taxi on the runway. The reasoning for it is valid. You don't want heavy aircraft turning around and tearing the pavement up to back taxi. But the blanket policy that the airport has right now is that no aircraft can make a U-turn and back taxi. And as Director Faulkner said to me, it was because the guys in the FAA couldn't seem to make the determination, the FAA tower couldn't seem to make the determination between light and heavy aircraft. My comment to that is, if they can't determine what's a light and what's a heavy, they shouldn't be in the tower. Because they are putting my life in jeopardy when I'm flying into land and they tell me to get too close to a heavy, to land too close. So they ought to have that judgment ability. And I think that our policy of not allowing any U-turns and back taxi is a flawed policy. I just wanted everybody to know because I think it's wrong and I think it should be changed.
That's just on 321, I assume.
yeah, I mean, obviously on the other two, we'd have to have back taxi because we don't have a, you know, another way off.
Another taxi.
You know, and so, you know, and I don't know that we'd object to that, Ron. I mean, we'd have to kind of figure out, we had a lot of damage after the.
We can, like on 3-4, especially when we used it during the 321 construction, you know, the damage on that's pretty significant from the heavy aircraft.
But I mean, we could probably make some kind of, you know, policy with the tower about, you know, what size aircraft, because it's not always just the size, it's also the wheel loading. You know, and I think that's the other problem is, you know, sometimes the heavier airplanes, you know, have better wheel loading than some of the smaller airplanes just because of the placement of the gear. You know, and so, you know, some of those guys are actually, you know, fairly nimble, you know, and then you've got the locking gear versus the non-locking gear, and if they're grinding that thing in, you know, pretty good, I mean, but we could probably come up with a better definition for the tower that would allow some back taxiing. You know, the other thing we want to avoid too is you know, a lot of excessive back taxiing that lengthens the runway time. You know, if somebody misses their turn, you know, rather than, you know, going all the way down and you know, going to the next taxi lane, sometimes back taxiing can be quicker. You know, and you know, I think that's what we have to weigh is, you know, we want to avoid, you know, long lengths of stay on the runway just for safety reasons, and then try to prevent as much damage as possible. But we could probably propose something and bring it back to the board that, you know, would allow some, you know.
Maybe you could bring it to a work session.
Yeah, we could do that if we,
Oh, that'd be-
in a couple of weeks when we come in July.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was two other things too, and I'll just mention them briefly just so they're on the record. Number one, general aviation flights crossing the border and landing at Great Falls to clear customs are still having problems with customs. Customs decided we're closing the door at 4, screw you. We're not coming back. And that's a real problem. We cannot put up with that kind of attitude from the government. And the other one is government-related as well. DHS, Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection, has started ramp checking aircraft on backcountry airstrips. And this is a really dangerous step up for them to take.
What are they doing at JC? I missed.
Well, what happened specifically is they flew into Schaefer Meadows, which is a grass airstrip in the Great Bear Wilderness, landed the helicopter right in the center of the strip, sat there with the engine running for 45 minutes while we interviewed 5 pilots and took down all the data plate information on 5 aircraft with no justification for their actions. They were not on a drug interception mission, they were not on a smuggling or illegal immigration mission. They were admittedly flying back there taking photographs of wildlife with the Black Hawk helicopter. But they tied up that airstrip and held 5 people for no reason. This is happening nationwide. It's been reported a lot. They're even in the center of the nation. They were calling out police forces in, surrounding landing aircraft with a lot of armed law enforcement officers, and this is just a real bad situation that is developing with DHS.
I don't know if that's something that,
If it were in my power to kick their worthless off the airport, I would do so.
I wasn't aware of that. I mean, as to the customs closing times, after the sequestration cut, my understanding was across the country they wouldn't authorize overtime, and so that's why they closed the office at 4. We had talked to, I think Dwight and I, between the two of us, had talked to Customs about what hours would make the most sense for Great Falls, when did the flights come in. In other words, could we change the work rule number times to fit our schedule better? What I understand now is that they're moving those operations back to where we can accept flights anytime again. However, at the start of the new federal fiscal year, the sequestration cuts are back in place, and it's uncertain how the new cuts will be dealt with within the departments. You may remember a few weeks ago, Congress gave each department the ability to manage their own budget, so that they took away the specific cuts that were called for and let them manage their own budget. And that's when I think the ability for the customs departments to reallocate monies to allow some limited amount of overtime came available. So from what I understand, we're going to be able to accept flights any time of day again currently, but at the start of October, there's still question about how that new cut of reduction will be dealt with and whether or not the hours will be affected. So for the time being, I think, Dwight, if you know different than me, speak up, but for the time being, I think we're back to normal. However, that's a temporary normal until next fiscal year.
Yeah, and the bottom line is that it's affecting our airport business.
Yeah.
Both Dwight and Mike are losing business because these airplanes are not being allowed to land here after hours, so.
Well, and the airport
Ain't
authority.
burning gas.
yeah.
Well, absolutely.
Landing fees.
Yeah.
Yes.
But-
Landing fees.
But it's
and
back to
fuel.
business as normal because they've reorganized their budget cuts and they're not impacting the payroll so bad. But as John said, it's going to be short-lived because October 1st, there's another round of budget cuts.
And one of the real odd outcomes out of that whole situation was the only airport in the state that could handle international flights and off hours was Havre, because they're able to call someone over from the port that's not being paid overtime. They're able to pull someone over from that 25-hour operation. So you have this bizarre situation where a number of the state's airports are capable of accepting international flights. We're all closed, and the Havre airport was able to process flights.
It was cut back.
Oh, was it, yeah, I'm sorry, I think you're right, I think it's Cut Bank.
You know what I
They're
find
coming
interesting
down from Coops.
about this whole thing, though, is you've got the DHS regional office 100 feet away from the customs building. You'd think there'd be somebody there that's qualified to walk across and clear those planes, but.
Yeah, it's the, you know, that three-headed monster that they made, you know, with agriculture, you know, customs and then border enforcement, has really never realized the same, you know, command structure. They operate to this day. In some places, actually, that's not true. The agriculture person has gone away, and the border, the customs agent is able to do the agricultural piece of that job. So there is some consolidation there, but in terms of the border patrol and the customs, there's just not much interplay between those agencies in the least. And that's part of the problem I think we have, is the command structure we have is more oriented to the, you know, to the
Security.
Well, in the land border, and they don't really understand as much the air side of it. Every time we talk to them, you know, even within their own agency, there's not a lot of understanding of the particular needs of airports.
Yeah. All right, anything else, GC?
No.
Commissioner Robinson? I'm fine. Any comments from the public? Any public comment? All right, well, thank you everyone for being here today, and we'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting. I would like to start the work session in 5 minutes if possible, and Commissioner, I'm going to have to leave at 15 for another meeting. So
Yeah, I will be okay.
okay.
I'm not good. I told you I have to leave by.
All right, good.
No, you know, he might, I didn't get a chance to check my messages, but he might have left me a message. He often does call ahead and tell me he's not going to make it.
Yeah.
And he usually asks me questions too.
How can we show our displeasure to the federal government about that?
How you doing, Jim?
Good. About what? Helicopter blocking.
Here, sir.
Good, Jim.
You guys still here?
They were fussing about the weather.
What were they?
He said, I don't know how those guys back
In some ways, the federal government.
technology we have. And I can tell you at every
And
mile
there's,
what's going to happen. He said, I'm still not going to fly this airplane because the winds are too strong. And
That's those guys back then, they just look like this.
yeah, they had no idea what they were going to fly. And it's just, that's all we have.
And they cover for themselves.
You gotta do what they want to do.
They do what they want to do, and
Ben, thanks for
no one's going to say any different.
appreciate your comments.
I
thought since you're having a work session on the COC thing.
Oh, good.
That was, I think, would you mind if we move that to the front, Jim?
Yeah, we'll do that.
I have to head over to
Get you out of here. Are you with Dorsey with me?
the competitor.
The guy up in the tower.
I asked my brother-in-law, I was a partner with Dorsey down in Lake City.
That was the pilot, if he can't hit Alpha 5 on 3 or Alpha 3 coming the other way.
Yeah, I actually worked
I'm gonna pilot her, I can't get her stopped by.
So you know, Bruce, Bruce Jack Manning.
You know, you're not.
Yeah, it's just a little bit.
These guys,
Everybody's critical of when the
Williams to be for light.
That's the issue.
What's your opinion if they're not gonna listen anyway?
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
And,
Stern Architects.
I guess you take overreacts to this stuff.
Yeah, Bruce is a good guy.
you're cleared for
Pretty much looking to come back.
My wife.
I think his wife was from.
Pretty cool. So you're fine.
And the guy was,
I don't want that guy to be killed.
Way back.
The tower was asking for it. Just so they could train.
Oh, yeah, he did the revolving
well,
door.
at least
You should welcome him with everything. Allow them in to help him fix the airport.
But even we as a board, can't we just write a letter? To send out all these issues and maybe give the start?
Yeah.
Let's do
I-
it.
5-6 miles. We're on 1 mile. Then he said,
Tough issue.
college, I'm gonna have to put you in the
How can we help render
I'll say 5
Jack?
miles. And I'm cool.
Maybe, you want to draft a letter, we'll all sign it?
No, it was a private jet. That's what we're trying to do.
Imagine it.
That's interesting. What was going on? Being such an advocate as you are, and proud owner of might have been that local airport. I thought that was.
And it's mine, but I guess.
Yeah, I thought that'd be appropriate, that, he might know somebody who would be happy to do that, but I don't know that
Got tired or what?
a single engine piston would look like that.
I mean, Bruce was actually, Bill Johnstone was actually looking at it.
Not unless you buy it, I think.
But I worked with him for $650,000.
I'll put the workshop on the way this works.
You gonna flip that?
Yeah.
That'll really get somersault.
Well, I know, it's close.
Did you see the Texan running around, JC?
No, I didn't.
You didn't?
Hey, JC.
Be careful.
You know, I was talking to Rod,
But I'm not on,
out of the base.
I don't get involved in that.
I talked to him this morning, you know, one thing that they're not checking is when Maelstrom stood up, a lot of the aircraft departed from there. Oh, really? There was a transition. Start here. See, it's one of the things there, they were railroading in all these B-38s, car after car with the fuselage and the two wings on that, then they had to assemble them here, do a test flight, and boy, they went. So, because what I was reading yesterday was that Maelstrom was built 43, and that it was about.
Oh, yeah, you would, if you know Larry.
Well, yeah. It is Larry, but I mean, you never know.
So that's interesting. So I think these guys
Put something on a train
hammer and so forth, they can get out there.
to load
And find that
a
information.
container that can.
That's what they're searching for.
Right on our ships.
Well, they were asking about the Russians,
The whole
where they
spot.
stand. They said, they thought they stayed east of town.
Yeah, Larry's been.
Yesterday, I looked around, I couldn't find it.
I usually tell people, you know, a lot of clients who try and keep them between the white lines. I just want to keep Larry on the black.
They had a radio component here in
We
town.
gotta get going here, we're gonna.
Probably.
Run out of time.
Going, sure.
The whole idea was to keep it.
I love Larry.
Does he have one of those, does he have licenses, those guys?
No, he's gotta go back.
Documentary that we had. Right, yeah, Gorfield had it the other day. When I saw the, it's called. Gorfield, East Bay. Now, that was East Bay. He's actually, that'll be.
Nobody had anything away with
Did they tell you that, you know, so one guy said they thought they'd sold it off to Discovery Channel. I'm not.
My mom lives in.
Well, it was funny when, you know, when I went over there in the afternoon, the governor was about their time. Oh, yeah, they were thrilled to meet him. Well, it was interesting, I could hear where they're plotting, you know, it's something, they said, we gotta get, really get our act together for the governor coming. I was wondering what they were gonna ask the governor for. Because they were getting ready to ask him for something, I could tell. Yeah, well, he's giving away money. That's what I would do.
Yeah, they wanted their piece.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a specialty that,
Yeah.
glad someone likes to read those documents. That's Borsville.
Oh,
Those are coffee.
Well, at least you're not a plaintiff. So there's still reason to keep a few of you guys around. Otherwise, you know, the law school could go away. We might have more.
My father and grandfather were prosecutors, and my brothers are prosecutors.
Okay, if we could go ahead and get started.
Oh, they're okay too.
The new ones? Yeah, the new ones.
But I like
Yes,
this.
now the old ones, the ones that used to be in water, we have to use. But yeah, the new ones over there, they.
You don't do new market.
Boy Flaherty was mad, he said we could have bought 400 rolls of toilet paper, or 400 rolls of paper towels for every one of those we bought.
Well,
I
big job.
Yeah, that's why I use them every time now.
What'd you do, replace the stuff?
Well, in the new bathrooms, we have those
Sinks,
dissect.
yeah.
Yeah, and we did replace, he gives us those one, machines and.
Yeah.
That's
Like, if I get a deal that's cheap.
What kind of comments is my attorney gonna? Yeah, I think the
attorney gonna listen to anyway?
Yeah, whenever I go in there.
I appreciate all the work.
Yeah.
Well, then they're
Didn't
so much more
realize that
sanitary.
OPAC even
Yeah.
puts way into these things.
That's from